This week on London Real, we have the English rapper, poet, and journalist, Akala.
Hate by the pound surrounds my reflection. I do this for my own protection.
If I didn't go to Pan-African Saturday School, if I didn't grow up in Hackney Empire, if I didn't listen to Wu-Tang Forever or read the autobiography of Malcolm X when I was 9, would I be the person I am today? Probably not.
One too many man that could have been doctors end up spending the whole life boxed up.
Hip-hop was my life. It was something I lived. I loved interacting with it. I wrote lyrics every day. I was in battles.
Because to me, all they do is breed conflict.
First time I saw someone get stabbed, I was 12, and it was a little poke. It was a meat cleaver in the back of a guy's head. I had other teachers that felt that a person from my racial, cultural, economic background, and certainly from my socioeconomic background, should not have been top of the class. These were guys who were doing well in the street, but they'd spent so much of their life in and out of prison, etc. But they were like, you don't want to be like us. You know, you're clever. In fact, if you drop out of school, we're going to give you a hiding.
Yeah, they say you are British, and that lovely patriotism they feed you. But in reality, you have more in common with immigrants than with your leaders.
If the music is good enough, if the visual is good enough, if your online interaction is decent, you can keep your integrity and have a career.
If we're honest, true strength is the strength to be honest.
Ultimately, any power structure in the world wants to stay powerful.
London Real presents Akala. Knowledge is power.
It's fear, but at 20, you can't admit it's fear.
Welcome back to London Real. Looks like this gentleman behind me has a few things he wants to say, but I'm going to start first. This week, we have rapper, poet, and journalist Akala on the show. And this is a pretty special gentleman, as you guys have been letting me know this week after I dropped the trailer a few days ago. There's been nothing but love, and the comments on YouTube and Twitter are blowing up, and for good reason. People are really excited to hear from this man and to hear what he has to say about a wide variety of topics. You know, Akala has been around for a long time. He first burst on the scene in 2006 after he received a MOBO award for his first album, and that's pretty special to get that and to get a lot of radio play. And he's pretty much gone from success to success along the way, but he hasn't had a traditional music career, whatever that is. It's funny, he actually started off probably being known as the brother of Miss Dynamite, and he was actually in that video, It Takes More, that he mentioned at the very end of this show. And I think he's the little kid playing video games in that video, but I'm not sure. I haven't gone back and checked it. But you know, his interests now are extremely diverse. He just came back from Jamaica, and he had a lot of interesting things to say to me about the Rastafari movement, which my limited knowledge about that was from the Bob Marley documentary, which, you know, in true Akala form, he was not necessarily impressed with, but he had to clarify some things when it comes to the movement and some of his thoughts about it. And so he talked about that. He's also got a movement called the hip-hop Shakespeare movement, which again, true to form to Akala, is not what you think it is at the start. It's not kind of a simplification or an urbanization of the great writer Shakespeare, but there's a lot more to that, and it's a bit deeper than that. And that's true about most of the things that Akala does, is that there's a lot more to it than what's at the surface. And you know, I've met a lot of people over the years. I've prepared for politicians like George Galloway. I've sat down with astrophysicists like Neil deGrasse Tyson. But preparing for Akala has got to be one of the most difficult things that I've had to do, because he's a guy with so many interests. He writes regularly for The Guardian. He's just got so many different things going on with him. You know, he's not really just a musician by any means. And so to meet him in person and to have this 90-minute conversation, which you're about to witness, was pretty fascinating, because I quite honestly meet a lot of people that I have this image of what they're going to be, but how can they be that? Because that's their music videos or that's their TED Talk. But in person, Akala is kind of even more, as you'll see. This is a guy that can speak fluently about subjects like the evolution of the Wu-Tang Clan, and then downshift into the socio-economic implications of the British public school system, and then again start talking about the history of slavery in Jamaica and America and the revisionist history around that topic. So now I'm starting to sound like Akala a bit, and he obviously had a lot of fascinating things to say. So I really hope that we got a nice snippet of who this man is, I'm always trying really hard when we do these episodes to give you the essence of this person or to give you the best of this person. And you know, it's kind of tricky sometimes because we have 90 minutes and there's no editing, there's no cutting. So it's like, boom, you get 90 minutes with this guy, and I hope I can bring out the most interesting things that Akala has to say. No doubt we could have spoke for 6 hours and probably barely scratched the surface. But if you're not an Akala fan, I think you will be after this. And if you are an Akala fan, I think you will be even more so after this. So if you're feeling this video, please share it out with your friends and like it and tweet it out. And if you're listening to us right now on iTunes, you can actually go to your podcast app and tweet this episode out. So please do that, give me some feedback, etc. If you'd like to see more musicians or anyone else on London Real, please check out our website. It's at londonreal.tv, and it's brought to you by the folks at Squarespace. And these guys are an all-in-one platform solution that can help you build your website or your online portfolio. And we've got it set up now on London Real that you can search by topic. So if you're feeling, for example, this episode with Akala, you can click on music and search by that. You'll find Ashley Walters. Next week, you're going to see Scroobius Pip. You're going to see all of our history of people like that. Or you can click on politics or success or nutrition or any of those things, and you can see what we got going on at London Real. So thanks to those guys at Squarespace, and if you want to check them out, you can click on the logo right here below. You can go set up your website. Do it right now. I say this so many times, you know, when it comes to the web, you get one chance to make a first impression, and so your website's got to not only be good, it's got to be slamming. You know, it's got to really grab people's attention. So you can do that with Squarespace. You can set it up free without even putting a credit card in, and for as little as like $8 a month, you can set yourself up. And when you go to buy, if you want to save 10%, use the code London. It lets them know that you're watching us and you're supporting the show. So I really appreciate that. And I'm walking through here down Brick Lane, if you guys don't know it. And if you want to check it out, come down here to Shoreditch. It's always colorful, always kicking off. You might see a few people photobombing me behind, but it's all good. I just want to give another shout out to the good folks at Bulletproof. And if you're not familiar with these guys, they make a fantastic coffee that's free of molds and toxins that I drink every day. I add some grass-fed butter and some brain octane oil, and I serve it to people that come over to the show. I drink it every day, and it's a fantastic company. These guys are really blowing up. All the people in Hollywood are now drinking this. They've got a book coming at the end of the year that's going to be fantastic. So big thanks to those guys. If you want to check it out, click on the Bulletproof logo or go to our website. I've got a video we did for them on sleep hacking, and they've got a fantastic podcast called Bulletproof Radio. So check that out. And that's it, kids. If you want to get in touch with me, send me an email. It's brian@londonreal.tv. We're always looking for people that want to help us book guests. I think we got to Akala through one of you guys who first told me that he existed, and then I think got me in touch with him, and we followed each other on Twitter. And you know, that's the way these shows happen. It's really because of you guys. So if you can make that happen with anyone else that you think I should know about or they should be on the London Real radar, then much love to you. Also, we're on Twitter, we're on Facebook. Hit us up. But the biggest thing you can do is tell a friend about London Real, or share this episode with your people and kind of let them know what's going on. And like I said, hit the like button, put some comments in there, and do all that. So I'm going to leave you now with the deep and meaningful words of Akala. I hope you enjoyed this episode. It was a very special one for me, and I think we're going to be seeing big things out of this man in the future. So enjoy. All right, let's do this. This is London Real. I am Brian Rose. My guest today is Akala, who is an English rapper, a poet, a speaker, and journalist. You're the son of a Jamaican father and a Scottish mother. You grew up just a few miles away in Camden. You played youth football for West Ham United as a kid, and if you're from the States listening to us and you've just now heard about the World Cup this year, because it seems to be getting bigger and bigger in America, that's quite a high standard. Mm-hmm. You also excelled at mathematics when you you were a kid, but you went into music. In 2006, after your first album, you were voted Best Hip Hop Act at the MOBO Awards. Since then, you released 3 more albums. You set up the Hip Hop Shakespeare Company. You performed a Fire in the Booth on Charlie Sloth's radio show, which has millions of views on YouTube. I highly recommend people watching it. Maybe go stop this right now, watch that, then come back to this show. You write for the Huffington Post. You perform at a bunch of the top musical festivals all over the world. You've given 2 more TED Talks than I have, because I'm at 0 right now. You've just come back from Jamaica. Akala, welcome to London Real.
Thank you. Welcome.
Thanks for being here. You've been requested by a bunch of our fans for like a long time, 9 months, a year. So, but you're very difficult to prepare for.
Yeah?
Yeah, like really hard. Like I've had all sorts of people in here, like we just talked about, like Jacques Fresco. I've had, you know, the British Minister of Parliament, George Galloway, and I had Neil deGrasse Tyson in here, writers like Irving Welsh, John Ronson, but you're probably the hardest. So bear with me. I hope we get through it all. You've got a lot of opinions. You're spoken about a lot of different things. I usually don't start here, but I thought maybe we could start here today with growing up in London, you know, growing up in Camden. You know, it's funny, I go to Camden now occasionally, and I kind of call it now the Camden theme park. I don't know if you agree with me, but it seems like you go to the Camden theme park and you can experience what Camden was like maybe 20 years ago or 15 years ago. And I know musicians complain about this too sometimes. They say that it's not really where the independent music is, that kind of thing. But what was it like growing up in Camden for you, and how has it changed?
For me, I wasn't tied to that one specific area, so I lived there, but my stepdad was the stage manager of the Hackney Empire Theatre, so I spent 3-4 days of the week there. A lot of my cousins lived in South London. My dad lived out of London in West Sussex, and my friends as teenagers lived kind of loosely between Tottenham and Harlesden. So I spent a lot of time all over London, really. And I think growing up in London as a whole, and Camden was perhaps the most extreme reflection of that, is the side-by-side inequality. Is what really strikes me. Now I'm older and I look back and I look at my childhood friends and I see who's done well and got good jobs and living nice lives, and then who hasn't. And you could have almost predicted at 6 years old, 5 years old, from the way in which people entered the world, the kinds of family backgrounds they were from, economically, culturally, ethnically. You could have added up a whole load of factors and pretty much predicted where everyone was going to end up. And sadly, that is how it's turned out. And so it makes me reflect really on social conditioning and the engineering of inequality. And there's a few exceptions to that, myself being one of them. I didn't grow up with my dad. We didn't have a whole load of money. But then I had some odds in my favor. I had a library in my house as a child growing up. My mum was always into reading, always into education. Kind of pushed that on me. I had my godfather and my stepfather who were around. I experienced some bad things, but I experienced some really good things that maybe have pulled me in the direction I've gone. But then partly it was just luck. I'd be lying if I said I was never involved in any problems that could have led me in the other way. So really, I think my greatest reflection on somewhere like Camden, going to school with children whose parents were millionaires, and then children those of us who grew up on and off quote-unquote benefits.
And you were interacting with all these kinds of
people? Well, I was in the lower strata of what we're talking about. Like I said, it was just my mum, and we grew up on and off those kind of problems. I lived in a council house. I was lucky I didn't live on the estate. I lived 2 streets from the estate. So like I said, I kind of was in between, in that even though economically I was worse off, culturally I was kind of equipped in many ways to deal with the world that would confront me. I went to a special Saturday school, taught me alternative kind of history, so always led me in a kind of conscious path, and in a path that would deal with some of the nonsense we also taught in school. But it's really that most stuck with me, the intergenerational inequality, even in a wealthy place like London.
And what were the key factors in some of your peer group that turned out, in the quote-unquote bad ways, or didn't go, I guess, ultimately where they wanted to go? Was it lack of the family? Was it socioeconomic? Was it pure economic?
I think it's all of the above. I think it's economic, it's social, it's cultural, it's racial, it's your conditioning, it's your family circumstance, but it's also the larger society. And it's even school. Even though we have access to education, which is a massive benefit compared to many other places in the world, education is off-putting in the current way that it is to many people. the things that we're taught in school, the authoritarian relationship between student and teacher, the dictatorial relationship, then particularly with a subject like history. But even as history impinges on maths and science and art and all these other things, the kind of Eurocentric curriculum is off-putting to a lot of people. The glorification of monarchy. Even if people can't articulate these things directly, even if students cannot say, this is what I think is bullshit about school, they just have a feeling. And so I think many of the students that are rebellious are often the most gifted, particularly from lower socioeconomic backgrounds, are often the most gifted students. You know, there was a famous study, I don't know the exact statistics, but it was looking at what percentage of people in prison had above Einstein's IQ. And there is a portion of people in prison, if you go from country to country, that have this high level of IQ. And I would argue that actually at 5, 6, 7 years old, this mold, this kind of industrial revolution, learning by rote, preparing us to be serfs to work in factories, mode of education that we're all being asked to fit in. This one-size-fits-all education doesn't fit everybody. And many of the people that are rebelling against it, Einstein included, you know, who's the guy everyone holds up as the worldwide measure of intelligence. We know that his school teacher wasn't a fan of him.
Did he have degrees even? I mean, he wasn't necessarily an academic by any means.
Not from my understanding, but I know that there's that famous quote of his school teacher telling him he wouldn't amount to anything.
Oh, okay.
Okay, so it's...
Him and a few others, probably.
So many others, right? So I'm saying that many geniuses are wasted because of society's preconceived notions of identity, because of the approach, and I'm not saying I was a genius. What I will say though is the way teachers dealt with me in my schools and my brightness wasn't as you'd expect teachers to often deal with it. I had some teachers that were very encouraging of it. I had other teachers that felt that a person from my racial, cultural, economic background, and certainly from my socioeconomic background, should not have been top of the class, and that pissed them off, and they were clear about it. That's what was interesting, that at 7, 8, 9 years old, my questioning and my display of intelligence was viewed as threatening and not as something to be encouraged. And I learned that very early, that actually this intelligence made certain sections of adult society uncomfortable.
So you would play it down sometimes, or subconsciously?
Sometimes, and I think conversely, you're going to play up your ignorance. You know, if ignorance is what is encouraged and rewarded in you, if sports are encouraged and given the thumbs up, but being good at maths is seen as not for people like you, which one are you going to gravitate towards? Which one are you socially rewarded for? And so I'm saying all of these factors, if we could put them in a kind of some kind of mathematical equation, amount to a society where prisons are full of poor people generally, you know, and then the racial disproportions within prison are what they are, you know, where women do not end up being astrophysicists per se, not because women are necessarily less good at science, but because from very young they're taught as a woman, you know, you don't want to be cleverer than a guy. You know, if you're cleverer than a guy, that's unattractive. And obviously a woman's ultimate aim in life is to get married, right, and to have children. That's all women should care about. So I'm saying these conditionings work on many levels, and they produce a result. But I think that we act like, in a society like this particularly, that education and politics and the economics are kind of benign. We're not encouraged to analyze, well, we live in a society that is a result of a particular set of people's ideas. You know, if you read Adam Smith,
history is written by the victorious,
yeah, right? But not even just the victorious, in the sense that our economy and our culture and this society, like all societies, was designed, and there are thinkers who are the designers of this society. And so it's a society in their image. And so logically it reflects the cultural appetites of its designers.
Is that intentional, that design? Or is it a conspiracy design? Or is it just a result of whoever's in power, whoever has the wealth, that it kind of...
Well, it's not conspiracy. I mean, people say Adam Smith or Thomas Malthus, they stated very clearly or even Plato, if we want to go back, you know, 2,500 years to the root of kind of designs of European culture. They stated very clearly what their design for society was, if we read the Republic, for example. You know, and so when we end up with societies that are a reflection of these designs, or Machiavelli, we act surprised. It's not conspiracy, it's an implementation of a plan. And that's not to say we are powerless to interact against that. That's not to say things always go the way the powerful want them to go. They do not. Because we're human beings and we all have our own thoughts and feelings and opinions, and we wake up from the matrix every so often and say, actually, we're going to force power to divert its course in this particular direction or that particular direction. But those interacting social forces, sadly, the balance of power often lies with the powerful. And so the results, I would argue, certainly of my upbringing and of the people I grew up around, the results were predictable, and they were the results that favored people that already had some access to power of some form, be that wealth, be that cultural, be that racial, social, gender, whatever else.
Have you seen much change, say, in the last 20 years, if you went and looked at a 10-year-old kid in Camden school system now to where you were 20 years ago? Have things changed significantly?
Yes and no. So I think that the outcomes are broadly similar. The same groups of people that were underachieving 20 years ago are sort of underachieving now, or underachieving. I would say they're achieving exactly what it's designed for them to achieve. Okay. I don't think anyone goes into state schools and is taught, you're going to run this country. I think when people go to Eton and they're destined for Oxbridge, they're taught, as I know, because I know people that have gone to Eton, right, they're taught you're the cream of the crop, you're the creme de la creme, you are destined to run this country. That is certainly not what I was told in my state school, and I doubt anyone else in a state school was taught that. We're not taught that sense of entitlement to have our voices heard. And so, I don't know, I think that, as I said, there's been reaction to it, and some things have changed for the positive, some things have regressed. For example, when I was young, supplementary Saturday schools, particularly in my community, in the African Caribbean community, seemed to be, to me at least, a lot stronger. There were a lot more of them, and they were a democratizing force. They were an alternative voice. They were a different voice within the society. And certainly many of the young African Caribbean origin students that I know that have managed to achieve in spite of the odds have been products of these kinds of community Saturday schools, myself included. And it seems that that movement isn't as strong today as it was 20 years ago, for a number of reasons. They still exist, but I think the more overt forms of racism that were around in the 80s and that were acceptable, were unapologetic within the society, created a more intense need or understanding of need in the community. Whereas I would say the manifestations of oppression are a lot more subtle today, and therefore it just means the reactions to it are not as forthright sometimes.
Why music? You know, you could have played football. I know you might have had an injury. You could have gone into math. You probably could have gone to Eton somehow.
I doubt it. But yeah, I don't think that would have sat with my persona.
I mean, I have a lot of people that listen to this from the States, and if you don't know, I mean, the British system is so unique, and the fact that you have these super elite schools that even if you're not told that these people will run the world, historically, you know, they have, and they are some of the top institutions, even to get into a lot of jobs in finance where I used to work. You know, there are feeder schools from Cambridge and Oxford. There is this kind of a shadow system of elite university versus non-elite in this country. I would say much more than
what
the
they call the red brick universities.
Okay.
But even before university level, you know, what is it? Something like 83% of senior government in this country went to Eton. Don't quote me on that exact statistic, right? But I know it's somewhere in that region. So not only are we talking about people in positions of power that are similar in terms of their gender, similar in terms of their race, similar in terms of their economic background, we're talking about people that just went to the same school. You know, and then we say democracy. I mean, how democratic can the decision-making process be when all the people in positions of power are not only from the same background, they all went to the same school.
Right.
So I think that is worthy of dialogue, but people don't seem to think so. But yeah, that school system is what it is. For me, music, I was always involved in music. I grew up on a sound system. I grew up partly in a theatre. I always loved music. I always loved writing. Which even though I was good at maths and science, writing was still the thing that I felt I excelled at most, in some form of writing. And then Public Enemy came out, but then Wu-Tang Forever came out.
Yeah, so 1998, Wu-Tang Forever came out.
Yes, 97.
97, excuse me. And so you heard that, and that made you start reading and start...
I said, this is what I want to do with my life. Well, I was already reading, but I'm saying Wu-Tang Forever was a moment of crystallization almost.
A bunch of guys from Staten Island are inspiring a kid in England to go...
For sure. Now I look back now, that album... Now, a lot of people prefer 36 Chambers, I get that, but I was 9 when 36 Chambers came out. So retrospectively, I think it's a great record, and I know Wu-Tang Forever got slept on a lot in the States, but for me here, number one, it was the first rap album to go number one in the UK. It was the first hip-hop album that, it seemed in my childhood, united everybody. Even if we listened to, you know, the people who were listening to Oasis and Nirvana or Blur or whatever else, Wu-Tang was the first record that got everyone's attention, but was still authentically hood. It wasn't trying to be an alternative music album. It just was, the level of poetry was that strong and that good that it seemed to pull everyone in. And everyone was just like, wow, in awe of these guys. And so what struck me about Wu-Tang was the level of unapologetic poetry from these guys. They didn't dress differently, they didn't speak differently, they didn't try and not be who they were. Some of them have been to prison, some have been shot, some have sold drugs. They had a, you know, cliche hip-hop upbringing, right? A ghetto upbringing in the projects in New York, at least most of them. And yet here they were using words like benevolent in rap songs. And I just found that amazing. And I wrote out the lyrics to all 28 songs. It's a double disc album. I still could tell you the whole album back to front, including the skits.
This is before they printed lyrics and albums.
Exactly.
Or you could get them on the internet.
I mean, this was when internet was really first starting to make its impact. I know for the young generation now, they can't even imagine a world without YouTube, let alone without internet, right?
Right. I mean, people will know, they forget that music was the original internet. You know, whether you look at the Doors singing Break On Through in the 70s and promoting an anti-war vibe, or Wu-Tang spreading a message in 97, I mean, that was the way.
Music was the way to spread a message. And so for me, I think that's what attracted me most. Football, I fell out of love with it. It was something that was very useful for me as a teenager that I think helped, at least to the best of its abilities, it helped keep me out of trouble. I was getting the train to Romford and back 3 times a week from North London, right? Which it grew me up as well. You know, my mum was very sick during my early period at West Ham. She couldn't take me. So I, as a 12-year-old boy, and Romford back then, I don't know how it is now, you know, but Romford back then was a real skinhead area. Like, it wasn't somewhere as a young black or brown person you really wanted to be found, to be honest with you. It was a real NF territory. And, you know, we got a little bit of abuse a few times, you know, and things of that nature. But it grew me up.
Character building.
It was character building. You know, it wasn't what my parents had to
That's a great way to look at any horrible experience in your life.
Yeah, I mean, at the time I did, but I wanted to play football that much, right? And I didn't, when I was 12 or 13 years old, you couldn't have told me I wasn't going to be a Premier League football player. But by the time I got to 15 or 16, I realised it wasn't for me. I didn't want to spend the next 15 years playing football. To a lot of people, that seems like lunacy, especially given the money involved. But it's the kind of thing you have to love, in my opinion, to do every day.
Right, no regrets on that.
No regrets on that at all. I mean, players that I was good, but players that were far better than me that I know personally are not playing in the Premier League.
Also, how do you express your creativity as a footballer? I know you can during the game, but you can't on 100 different levels like you are able to.
Exactly, A, and B, I think football's very political though. Again, it cloaks itself, kind of like the music industry now, in this mythology or in this shroud of apoliticism. So many things that are political go on within the footballing world, yet footballers are encouraged to keep quiet, to shut up. There's this really sly social pressure that's put on them to shut them up, basically.
Okay.
To keep them well-paid millionaires, basically.
Okay. Political between teams or between sovereign nations?
I mean, all of the politics of the society that we've just been talking about, all of the geopolitics of the world that we can analyze are reflective within sports. You understand? We were talking about the World Cup earlier and the politics of the World Cup going to Brazil, and now we've heard it's going to be in Qatar, right? You know, I'm talking about all of the same stratification processes that exist within the society, exist within professional sports.
Okay. And music, but we'll get to that.
And there's a power structure within football, and you're encouraged to be obedient to that power structure.
And it's a huge moneymaker these days, which has changed dramatically since you were playing. I mean, the last 10 or 20 years,
even when I was a child, really the money came into football when the Premier League was founded, which was in 1992, and I was 9 then.
Right.
So my whole life growing up, football was big money. Yeah.
Okay.
I mean, people were on, even when I was a child, Stan Collymore got transferred for £5 million. I remember that being a big deal. But if you think, in the mid-90s, that's still a lot of money, right? And people were on 20, 25 grand. That was people are on 10 times that now,
right.
But 20 grand a week still wasn't anything to be sniffed at, right?
Yeah, it's still a lot of money.
Yeah.
When you tell people that in the States, they're like, a week? I mean, you know, the salary's quoted in weekly terms over here.
Yeah.
It's pretty shocking. So you were saying creativity, football has a lot of politics as well. So, all right, no regrets there.
No.
Music. Okay, let's talk Wu-Tang briefly. You said one time that after the Wu-Tang album came out, Wu-Tang Forever, you said immediately after that, hip-hop went from being about history, philosophy, and culture to being literally money, cash, and hoes. Now, was that you speaking at the time, or did it really trend that way?
I think that's a polarizing and extreme statement, but I think that's sort of the way it felt at the time. It felt like there was this brief moment in the mid-90s, and I know a lot of people position it even earlier.
Right.
They would position it at the point of Public Enemy. They would position it, you know, at the point that NWA came out. I'm saying for me, the final time that a group of what I saw, and of course they had their street side, which I think was cool. What I loved about Wu-Tang was that they were reflective of the whole hood, in the sense that You had Ghostface and Raekwon rapping about selling drugs and rapping about that lifestyle that they lived and went through. And you had Rizzo on the total other side calling himself the Abbot and rapping about philosophy. You had the Jizzo who rarely swears, you know. So you had and then you had ODB who, you know, kind of played the group drug addict, who ironically, from what I understand in real life, was the only member of the group who was actually from a middle class home. Okay. So he reflected this psychosis by where, you know, young African-American men particularly, you know, are encouraged by the stereotypes of the wider society to believe if they're not from the ghetto, then they're not really black. They're not black enough, right? And so it seems that ODB was playing into that a little bit rather than being comfortable with the fact that he was actually from quite a nice home.
And so for me, they were fairly anti-commercial.
They were, but then they became so wildly commercially successful.
Right.
And it feels for me the last time that happened in hip hop, that a group who didn't have choruses on every song, a group whose music sounded hard, a group who were rapping about serious issues of politics, philosophy, history, you know, a group that really reflected the culture of hip hop and reflected hip hop's origins, you know, in the ghettos of America, but also in the wider African cultural diasporic experience in the Caribbean and South America and what it's meant to be black in all of those societies. Wu-Tang seemed the last commercially successful group that was successful. And that year, they didn't win the Grammy for Best Hip Hop. Puff Daddy won it for No Way Out.
Okay.
You know, and to me, to argue that Puff Daddy's album is a better rap album,
it was more popular.
We're not talking about commercial success. We're talking about best rap, I do believe the category was. To argue that, in essence, Puff Daddy is a better reflection of rap or hip-hop than Wu-Tang, I think, is a far stretch of the imagination. But it made it very clear what the mainstream industry, in spite of commercial success, what it wanted to elevate and what it didn't want to elevate, in my opinion.
Okay. And how did that direct your music and your career? Did you want to bring back? Did you want to not go in that direction?
Well, at that stage, the idea that you could have a career as a British rapper was kind of ridiculous.
Because it wasn't happening.
It just wasn't. There were guys doing it. And respect to the guys who paved the way, respect to the London Posse and to Skinny Man and to all of these guys that paved the way so someone like me could exist, right? Or Ty or whoever else. But the idea that you could actually make a living and a career, this is before YouTube, this is before the internet interacted with music in any significant way.
Right.
It didn't seem possible to do that and keep your integrity, certainly. And so even though I wanted to do it, I didn't know how I was going to do it yet. And I was still playing football. So I saw all of this politics of hip hop. Hip hop was my life. It was something I lived. I loved interacting with it. I wrote lyrics every day. I was in battles. I did this, I did that. But if you'd have told me then that, you know, I'd do 7 or 8 UK tours, I'd release, you know, 4 albums and 3 mixtapes independently, that I'd literally perform in 30 or 40 countries all around the world as an independent artist, I would have been very pleasantly surprised, even though a lot of people were like, well, you should be more commercially successful. You should sell more records. I see it differently. I'm very grateful for where I'm at because I feel like I've been able to achieve a certain level of success, but maintain that integrity and that message. And I don't see too many artists able to do that. And that doesn't mean I'm dissing other artists because I don't think every artist views it the way I do. If all you care about in life is buying Gucci and drinking champagne and your music reflects that, doesn't make you a sellout. But if you're someone like me, and you care about different things, and then you make music about Gucci and champagne just to sell records, then you are a sellout. I don't think everyone should see the world the way I see it. I'm saying for someone with my predisposition to then start making music I dislike just to succeed is something that would compromise my spirit, and I'm not willing to do. But I am, like I said, very content with where I'm at in terms of my career.
If you look at 2006 at that Mobile Award, whether you consider that a milestone or not, I guess it is an event that happened back in the past. I mean, what did it take to get there?
Well, one of the things I was able to do in 2006, I was probably one of the first and one of a tiny handful of independent hip-hop artists that have ever managed to break a Radio 1 playlist. And the way the industry works in this country, if you don't get onto Radio 1, they're really the gatekeeper in terms of selling, being commercially successful.
Still to this day.
To this day, if you're not on Radio 1, you're not going to sell over X number of albums. I don't know what the magic number is, but let's say it's 30,000 or 50,000.
And that hasn't changed in 10 years.
If you're not on it hasn't changed since forever.
How is that even conceivable?
Well, because the playlist, I mean, not just, obviously there's Radio 2 as well, but Radio 2 doesn't sell you as many records. You can literally correlate what Radio 1 playlist you're on with how many records you're going to sell.
Okay.
You can have a small independent fan base like me and succeed self-released.
Right.
But you cannot be exposed to a wider, and the way the music industry works in this country, when you go to magazines, when you go to, say, MTV, when you go to any area of the industry, they ask you for what's the plot. They don't ask you, is the music good or not? They ask for what's the plot, i.e. who's writing about you, who's playing your video, but ultimately, and most importantly, who on Radio 1 is playing your records. And if you've got a play from this guy and that guy and that guy, and you're about to go onto the playlist, then you're going to get written about, you're going to get talked about, and your status goes up. That's the way it works. One of the things I was able to do in 2006 was to break that, which is not easy to do. I had one as an independent artist. I had a song called Shakespeare, get onto the playlist. By the back door, really. It got played by a house DJ, by Pete Tong.
Okay.
So it didn't come the traditional way that rap is supposed to go on the playlist. Pete Tong played it, and then it got played by other people from there, by Zane Lowe and others, and it made it onto the playlist, which not too many independent artists do. Then it meant the video would obviously get played a lot by MTV, etc. And so it meant even as an independent artist, I had a certain level of visibility that I could be in a category with much more numerically successful American artists. And a lot of people diss the Mobos, and there's contradictions within the Mobos, but for me, the only major award ceremony I saw supporting independent artists, I wasn't the first independent UK hip-hop artist to win that award. Sway won it the year before me. You know, and again, he was an independent artist. There were no other award ceremonies giving people like him a look in. And so for me, for such a commercial award ceremony, which does what it does, that was something that gave a lot of people an awareness of who I was and was a way in. And frankly, in economic terms, at that point, it sold albums. When you could put Mobile Award Winner sticker on your CD, this is back when you had record stores, HMV would rack you differently. You know, you have to buy racking. A lot of people who are not in the music industry don't know that. If you want to be at the front of the store, you pay the retailer thousands of pounds to be at the front of the store. But if you win a Mobo, I mean, or a Mercury or a Brit or whatever else, you know, you get priority racking. So that debut album sold a lot of physical copies because of that. So there were consequences, and it just meant I had a lot of people's attention. But, you know, I think I made some mistakes, and me and my team made some mistakes in the way we released that record, in our understanding of the industry. We were new to things then.
It was your first album that got
My first album. We didn't fully understand yet. I mean, YouTube had just come around, and we didn't understand really how to use and embrace that. We spent a lot of money on videos that we probably didn't need to spend, but we were just at that curve where you still needed to get on the television. And to get on the television, you had to make videos that looked like they could compete with these big budget US artists that are having millions of pounds spent on their videos.
They were hiring Hollywood directors to make their videos.
Exactly, right? So, I mean, Channel U also changed that. Channel U was a big part of the industry back then, where it was the first channel, and it forced MTV Base and other stuff, I think, give more attention to UK artists, but it also showed there was a market for underground UK hip-hop.
Right.
People like myself and Kalashnikov, you know, and others came out of that, you know, or Kano or Sway or any of these guys in this period. Channel U was a big part of giving people a platform.
Which was independent music television only.
It was an independent music channel that basically played anybody.
Did the people vote that up at all, or they just...
People voted, you know, people voted, people could request your video, but the point was it was a non-playlisted channel. Okay. So it meant that anyone with a decent video, sometimes not even a decent video, there were some terrible videos played on there. The point was it was kind of democratic in a way, you know, it had its own internal issues or whatever else, but it certainly gave many, many people who wouldn't have been heard otherwise a platform. The first way I know I heard someone like Kalashnikov, for example, who was was his video Murder. And I remember watching that video and thinking, right, this guy can really rap, right? And it was Channel U that gave him that exposure to me, even as someone who's in the scene. And so there were a number of converging forces in that period that allowed a few of us to break through, and many of us are still here, you know, 10 years later. But the same challenges remain in terms of the way the industry works, the way radio and TV works. But what you do have is you have the internet, which we're using right now, which is a way you can have a career with really very little compromise. You can shoot what video you want to shoot, you can make what music you want to make, and if the music is good enough, it will find an audience. It might not find an audience commensurate with the quality of the music. You might feel that you should sell X number of albums and only sell X, but if the music is good enough, if the visual is good enough, if your online interaction is decent, you can keep your integrity and have a career. I know, because like I said, I've performed in, I don't know, 35, 40, 50 countries all around the world. And what's ironic, I don't say that to show off, but I think what's ironic and what's important for young artists to see is that in this day and age, precisely because of the integrity in the music, precisely because I talk about things that other artists are not talking about, is why I've been invited to go to all of these places. It's not an accident. And so that's not to say, again, that someone who doesn't have my predisposition should just rap about the things I rap about to try and be successful. It's to say and to encourage artists that there is another alternative. There is another way to market now that there wasn't 20, 30, 40 years ago.
if they curate a fan base, they can kind of make a living doing that.
Yeah.
They're not going to be flying jets and stuff.
No,
but
for
these
sure
days,
they're not, no.
but you really do have to work at it, right? Because the competition's there.
Yeah.
And you still, ultimately, for the big success, like you said, you need to be on the playlist. You need to have the label.
1,000,000%.
Have you seen this movie called Artifact? It's by the guy that, his name is Jared Leto. He's the lead singer for 30 Seconds to Mars.
But I haven't seen the film.
So it's this whole film about his fight with his label. I think it was BMG or something, about how they had this whole, they had basically had like 3 or 4 #1 albums, and after 10 years with the label, they owed the label $2 million or something. And yeah, and go ahead. Sorry.
But anyone who understands the way the music industry is designed, there's a very simple book artists should read. It's called Everything You Need to Know About the Music Business by Donald S. Passman. And it breaks down loads of things that they do in the music industry. Like, for example, they have a system called free goods. So they sell 85 of every 100 CDs to a retailer.
Right.
And they give 15 away free.
They brought this
but
up.
But they charge a higher percentage for the 85. So the label doesn't lose money. It's literally just a way, because the artist gets paid off a retail royalty, it's a way of giving away 15% of the CDs so that the artist doesn't have to be paid on those 15.
On those 15.
They have another clause for breakages back in the day when vinyl used to break. Now they charge the clause for vinyl breakages on MP3 downloads. You know, even Eminem had to sue his label to get back the millions of dollars that he lost for vinyl breakages for sales of a digital thing. You know, so there's a lot of scams and ways in which, I mean, TLC owed money after selling 10 million albums, right? So we know that this kind of shafting and robbery and thievery, the music industry is notorious. That's one of the reasons I didn't want to go in that major label route. I'm not saying it happens to every artist, but I'm saying that if you can have 3 or 4 #1 albums and owe your label money, saying if you study the mathematics of the way the industry works, that doesn't mean the label's lost money on your product. People shouldn't make that mistake. No. It means that the things that are charged to you, the things that are recoupable, are unrecouped from your percentage. So let's say you get a 12% royalty. It means that production costs, the cost of making the album, 50% of the video budget, has to be recouped out of your 12%. Right. So the label's already made their money 4, 5, 6 times over, right? But you're unrecouped. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
And so it's this kind of bullshit that puts a lot of artists off. Yeah,
you would either love or hate this movie watching this, because they talked about exactly what you just said. Yeah. They're selling digital downloads and paying for breakage fees, et cetera, et cetera. And now you look at 30 Seconds to Mars and they're touring like madmen, and then you realize, oh, it's because the label's not taking a cut of the tour. So that's how they've made their money over the years.
But in this day and age, most labels are taking a cut of the tour, or merchandise, of everything. Now listen, I think in an ideal world, if the label spends money, invests in you, in a fair world, there's a way of constructing a 360 deal, which is the model a lot of labels do today. Yeah. That is fair. If you're the kind of artist that wants to be massively popular and sell millions of records, only a major label has the capability to make that happen for you. If they make that happen for you and they construct some kind of fair deal where they get a cut of the things that come out of that, I don't see for that kind of artist that that's terrible. The problem is people are so greedy, they have to, you know, shaft you that extra mile. They can't just say, you know what, we've made $100 million off you. You know, we should cut you in a piece of the pie, you know, a fair piece of the pie. We'll take 99 and we'll leave you with 1. You know, there's just this propensity to just steal and steal and steal. That isn't necessary because there is money going around. But yeah, most artists that are touring now on that scale, the labels are taking a cut of that as well.
Did you ever think about signing with a label?
Yeah, it's something I contemplated.
Because after the Mobo, you must have been approached by a lot of people.
Yes and no. You know, there were whisperings, but I think the general understanding was that I was a bit hard-headed and I'm not one that was really willing to compromise. And I also, because of my knowledge of the music industry, I wasn't going to sign up for bullshit, for the kinds of clauses that we went through. So I kind of made the decision then that I would do it myself independently, and will continue to do it myself independently unless someone makes me an offer I can't refuse. And what does that mean? It doesn't just mean money. It means creative license. It means complete creative control. It means no censoring on anything I say, etc. And I don't think there are very many major labels in the world today willing to go for something like that. If we use the analysis of my brethren Loki, you know, I know he sold thousands and thousands and thousands of albums with no radio, no TV, just off YouTube. Right. Now, if the music industry was just about making money, labels will be beating down his door. There's very few rock bands, very few pop artists that have sold the amount of albums he's sold.
Low-key has, yeah.
That have been able to sell out the Garage. Both me and him, independently of one another, have both sold out the Garage in Holloway, a venue, I don't know, what's the capacity, 650, 700 or whatever it is, which, as an independent artist, no song on the playlist. My song on the playlist was 7 years ago, right, 8 years ago. So no one can say it's because of the radio. Literally, because of a strong fan base online, because of YouTube, etc. We can sell that amount of tickets, we can sell the amount of merch we've sold, we can sell the amount of albums we sold. Labels should be beating down his door if they want to make money, right? But his political message is just never going to be played on the radio.
Not marketable. And
but that's the thing, it is marketable.
Okay.
Because how is it he's able to sell that amount of albums and that amount of tickets just off YouTube? If people don't want to hear all that political shit, how is his success or Immortal Technique's success, you know, how is that explainable? They tell us it's not marketable. What they mean is, again, it doesn't fit with the agenda of the people who control the music industry. That's not about conspiracy. What would be the consequence if the song Terrorist, for example, was that popular just off a YouTube video? What would be the consequence if it was played daytime on Radio 1? Do you think people would just suddenly not like the song and not listen to it? But what he's saying is unacceptable to be played at that time of day to that audience, not because it wouldn't resonate with them, actually quite the contrary, because if it resonates with them, what are the consequences of that? And what are the consequences of making someone like Kareem Dennis, aka Loki, a national superstar in a country like this? He's not harmless, he's got something to say. What are the effects on people's consciousness of making someone like that a pop star? So he will not be made a pop star, right, even if he can generate money.
And you're saying that starts to break down other institutions, political,
of course,
commercial.
To continue watching the rest of the episode for free, visit our website londonreal.tv or click the link in the description below.